Republic Aviation pitched the F-105 Thunderchief to the Air Force in 1952 as a single-seat nuclear strike fighter. That's what it was designed to do: fly low, fly fast, deliver one tactical nuke to one Soviet target. Get out. The assumption baked into every design decision was that the pilot would never see an enemy fighter, because Soviet air defenses would either kill him on the way in or he'd be past them before they reacted. Air-to-air combat wasn't part of the mission profile. The Air Force bought it anyway. Bought 833 of them between 1958 and 1964. By 1965, the F-105 was flying missions over North Vietnam, carrying conventional bombs instead of nuclear weapons, and the whole design suddenly made less sense. It was big. The empty weight was 27,500 pounds, which made it heavier than some World War II medium bombers. Fully loaded for a strike mission, the Thud weighed 52,000 to 54,000 pounds, depending on fuel and ordnance. That's not fighter weight. That's flying a small building. The official tactical manual said the F-105 was capable of air-to-air combat in emergencies, but should avoid engagements with dedicated fighters whenever possible. Reasonable advice. The Thud could hit Mach 2.1 clean at altitude, but nobody flew clean over North Vietnam. You flew heavy, low, and fast until the MiGs showed up. Then you either ran or got shot down. That's what the statistics suggested would happen. Pilots called it the Lead Sled. Some called it the Thud, which is the sound it made hitting the ground. By mid-1966, the F-105 loss rate was absurd. Over 350 Thuds lost in Vietnam eventually, most to ground fire, some to MiGs. The airplane was doing a job it wasn't designed for, in conditions its engineers never anticipated, flown by pilots who understood the weight problem better than anyone. Then someone shot down a MiG-17 with one. The records conflict about who got the first kill. Some sources credit Captain William Hosmer in April 1965. Others say it was someone else in June. The documentation from early Rolling Thunder missions is incomplete, either because paperwork got lost or because nobody thought F-105 air-to-air kills mattered enough to track carefully. Fair enough. One kill doesn't change doctrine. But the kills kept happening. Not many, not often, but consistently enough that by 1967, the Air Force had to acknowledge that F-105 pilots were somehow winning dogfights against MiG-17s and MiG-21s, despite flying an aircraft that outweighed the MiG-17 by 30,000 pounds in combat configuration. The manual said, avoid engagements. Physics said, you'll lose. The kill-loss ratios said something else was happening that the manuals and physics hadn't accounted for. This bothers me because the F-105 should have been helpless in a turning fight, should have bled energy in every vertical maneuver, should have been easy prey for lighter, more maneuverable opponents. The engineering constraints were real. The weight was real. But 27 confirmed MiG kills between 1965 and 1970 are also real. And nobody wrote down a clear explanation for how Thud drivers kept winning fights they were supposed to avoid. Ken Bell squeezed the trigger on May 13, 1967, and held it for 1.2 seconds. 400 rounds from the M61 Vulcan cannon. The MiG-17 came apart at 4,500 feet over Yen Bai. Bell's flight lead had called the MiGs inbound 3 minutes earlier. Standard procedure said jettison your bombs, light the afterburner, run. Bell was carrying 6 750-pound bombs and a full internal fuel load. Total weight somewhere around 52,000 pounds. The MiG-17 weighed maybe 11,000 pounds combat loaded. The smart move was running. Bell turned into them instead. Here's the tangent. The F-105's internal gun installation was a bureaucratic accident. Early design studies didn't include a gun at all. Nuclear strike fighters don't need guns. But the Air Force's Tactical Air Command insisted every fighter carry a cannon for ground attack work. So Republic stuck the M61 in the nose. 6 barrels, 6,000 rounds per minute theoretical rate, 1,028 rounds total in the drum. Then someone at Republic calculated the weight penalty. The gun system added 1,965 pounds to the aircraft. The ammunition drum added another 879 pounds loaded. Total of 2,844 pounds for a weapon system the primary mission didn't require. Republic's engineers proposed removing it. Tassi said no. The gun stayed because ground attack doctrine required it, not because anyone thought F-105 pilots would use it against MiGs. Bell used it against a MiG. The gun camera footage shows the MiG-17 attempting a horizontal scissors maneuver, probably expecting the Thud to overshoot. That's what lighter fighters do against heavy opponents: force an overshoot, get behind them, kill them. Bell didn't overshoot. He pulled 5 Gs in a 52,000-pound airplane and stayed inside the MiG's turn radius long enough to get the Pipper on target. That shouldn't work. The sustained turn rate of an F-105 at 5 Gs and 450 knots is worse than a MiG-17's by every calculation. But Bell made it work anyway, probably because he'd done the math differently than the engineers who wrote the manual. The MiG pilot ejected. Bell's wingman confirmed the kill. Bell climbed back to 15,000 feet, rejoined his flight, and continued to the target. They dropped their bombs 14 minutes later. Bell landed at Korat with 800 pounds of fuel remaining, which meant he'd burned nearly everything in the turn fight and the run to target. The mission report lists the engagement as lasting 48 seconds from first visual contact to MiG impact. Bell fired once, got 1 kill, used 400 rounds out of 1,028, returned to base. His squadron mates asked him why he didn't run. The answer, recorded in the debriefing transcript, was that running meant giving the MiGs a free shot at the rest of the flight. Turning into them meant forcing them defensive. Bell chose forcing them defensive. The Air Force sent the gun camera footage to Republic Aviation with a request for analysis. Republic's response, declassified in 1983, noted that the engagement parameters exceeded the F-105's designed air-to-air performance envelope, but acknowledged the kill as valid. Their analysis didn't explain how Bell had won the fight, just confirmed that he had. The F-105 has a wing loading of 118 pounds per square foot at maximum takeoff weight. That number matters because wing loading determines turn performance. Lower wing loading equals tighter turns. The MiG-17's wing loading sits around 64 pounds per square foot. The MiG-21 runs about 76. Both numbers are better than 118. Turn radius at a given speed and G-load is a function of weight, lift coefficient, and wing area. The F-105 loses on weight, loses badly. At 52,000 pounds combat loaded, the Thud needs more airspeed to generate equivalent lift compared to an 11,000-pound MiG-17. More airspeed in a turn means wider radius. Wider radius means the MiG stays behind you. The instantaneous turn rate formula is equally unforgiving. The F-105 could pull 7.33 Gs maximum before structural failure. Most pilots stayed below 6 Gs because the airframe was old and nobody wanted to test the limits. The MiG-17 could pull 8 Gs all day. Even at equal G loading, the Thud's higher weight meant slower angular velocity. Energy management gets worse. The J75P-19W engine produced 24,500 pounds of thrust with afterburner. Sounds impressive until you divide by weight. Thrust-to-weight ratio at combat weight was 0.47 to 1. The MiG-17's ratio was better. The MiG-21's was better. Every dedicated fighter the North Vietnamese flew had better thrust-to-weight. Specific excess power, the rate at which an aircraft can gain energy through acceleration or climb, favored the MiG in every engagement envelope below 25,000 feet. The F-105 bled energy in turns and couldn't get it back fast enough to reposition for another pass. One mistake, and you were dead. Roll rate was the only category where the Thud had an advantage. The hydraulically boosted ailerons could snap the aircraft from 90 degrees left bank to 90 degrees right bank in 1.4 seconds at 450 knots. Faster than the MiG-17. Faster than most fighters flying in 1967. But roll rate doesn't win dogfights unless you have a plan for using it. The Air Force knew all this before the first F-105 deployed to Southeast Asia. Test pilots at Edwards had flown mock combat against F-4 Phantoms and T-38 Talons, to establish the Thud's air-to-air limitations. The conclusion was unambiguous. The F-105 would lose sustained turning engagements against lighter opponents. Avoid dogfights. Use speed. Disengage when possible. But disengaging requires geometry the enemy doesn't always give you. If the MiGs show up while you're 40 miles from the border at 8,000 feet with a full bomb load, you can't outrun them and you can't outclimb them. You have to fight or die. 27 F-105 pilots fought and won anyway. Some got lucky, some made one perfect shot before the geometry collapsed. Some broke rules that shouldn't have worked. The after-action reports document the kills but don't explain the technique because there wasn't a unified technique. Each engagement was different. Each pilot solved the physics problem differently. Nobody at Republic Aviation expected this. Nobody at Tactical Air Command planned for it. The F-105 was supposed to deliver bombs and survive through speed and ECM jamming. Air-to-air kills were accidents, anomalies. Statistical noise in a dataset about nuclear strike capability that got repurposed for conventional war. Leo Thorsness checked his oxygen connection at 7:15 on March 10, 1967. His F-105F, a two-seat Wild Weasel variant, was heavier than the single-seat models. The back seat carried an electronic warfare officer named Harry Johnson who operated the radar warning receivers and jamming equipment. Their mission was SAM suppression over Hanoi. Find surface-to-air missile sites, mark them for the strike package, kill them if possible. Thorsness carried AGM-45 Shrike anti-radiation missiles instead of bombs. His aircraft weighed 54,000 pounds at takeoff. The Wild Weasel mission profile assumed he'd never see MiGs because he'd be too busy dodging SA-2s and tracking radar emissions. Thorsness launched at 7:45 hours with 3 other Weasels and 16 strike aircraft. The MiG-21s appeared at 10:18 hours, 4 of them. North Vietnamese ground controllers had started vectoring interceptors directly at Wild Weasel flights because killing the SAM hunters meant the strike packages lost their electronic warfare coverage. Smart tactics. The MiG pilots knew the F-105Fs were even heavier than standard Thuds and assumed they'd be easier kills. Thorsness turned into them. Johnson called radar warnings from 3 different SA-2 sites simultaneously. They were bracketed. SAMs below, MiGs at their altitude, no safe direction except through the threat. The first MiG-21 made a slashing pass from Thorsness's 7 o'clock high. Thorsness broke left, pulled 5.5 Gs, felt the airframe shudder. The MiG overshot. Thorsness reversed right, used the roll rate advantage, got the pipper on the MiG as it tried to extend away. He fired. The M61 put 200 rounds into the MiG-21's tail section. The enemy pilot ejected at 9,000 feet. Johnson was calling more radar warnings. 2 SA-2s had launched. Thorsness broke hard right again, descended to 6,500 feet, defeated the missiles through violent maneuvering that shouldn't have been possible in a 54,000-pound aircraft. The remaining 3 MiGs had scattered when Thorsness killed their leader. Standard response: loss of formation discipline. But Thorsness's element lead, another F-105F, call sign Panda 02, was in trouble. 2 MiG-17s had jumped him during the chaos. Thorsness climbed back to 11,000 feet and ran the intercept geometry in his head. Distance to Panda 02 was 6 miles. Closure rate roughly 900 knots, 24 seconds. He got there in 22 seconds. The MiG-17s saw him coming and broke off their attack. Thorsness fired at the trailing MiG from 4,000 feet, missed, fired again, hit the wing root. The MiG went into a flat spin, no ejection. Panda 02 called clear and rejoined the formation. Total engagement time: 4 minutes, 12 seconds. 2 MiG kills, 3 SAM defeats, 0 losses. The mission continued. Thorsness marked 2 active SAM sites for the strike package. The bombers hit their targets. Everyone came home. The mission report is 14 pages long and describes the engagement in dry technical language that doesn't capture what happened. Johnson's debriefing statement is shorter. Leo flew the airplane past its limits. I don't know how it stayed together. March 10, 1967 was a Friday. Thorsness flew again on Sunday, then Tuesday, then Thursday. The operational tempo in early 1967 was relentless, and the Wild Weasels were always short-crewed because the mission had the highest loss rate in theater. The North Vietnamese Air Force trained its MiG-17 pilots using Soviet doctrine written for intercepting American B-52 bombers over the Arctic. High-speed slashing attacks. One pass, disengage. The doctrine assumed the targets would be large, slow, and flying straight lines toward Soviet cities. The MiG-17 was designed for this mission in 1950. It worked against bombers. F-105s weren't bombers. They flew at 540 knots at low altitude, jinked constantly to avoid ground fire, and carried ECM pods that jammed fire control radars. The first North Vietnamese pilots who encountered Thuds over the Red River Valley in 1965 reported confusion about what they were fighting. The aircraft looked like fighters, flew like fighters in straight lines, but turned like bombers when engaged. One declassified VPAF operations summary from May 1967 describes F-105 formations as heavy strike aircraft with unexpected defensive capability. The phrasing is careful, not fighters, strike aircraft. But the unexpected defensive capability phrase appears 6 times in the document, which suggests someone was trying to explain losses that didn't match predictions. Soviet advisors embedded with the 921st Fighter Regiment recognized the problem faster than VPAF command. A memo dated June 1967, I found this in a Taiwanese intelligence archive, original Vietnamese with Russian annotations, recommends modified tactics against F-105 formations. The key passage translates roughly as, attacking pilots must maintain energy advantage through vertical maneuvers. Horizontal engagements result in unpredictable outcomes due to American pilot aggression and armament effectiveness. Unpredictable outcomes. That's diplomatic language for, we're losing fights, we should win. The armament issue was real. The M61 Vulcan had a maximum effective range around 4,000 feet, but could hit targets at 6,000 feet if the pilot knew the ballistics. MiG-17s carried 37mm and 23mm cannons, with slower muzzle velocities and shorter effective range. American pilots who survived getting into gun range usually won because they could shoot first and shoot more accurately. But the aggression factor matters more. Soviet doctrine emphasized discipline. Stay in formation. Follow your leader. Execute the attack profile as trained. Break off when ordered. The doctrine worked against bombers because bombers don't turn into you. F-105 pilots turned into everything. Turned into MiGs. Turned into SAMs. The predictable attack geometry Soviet doctrine required didn't exist when the target refused to be predictable. One North Vietnamese pilot who defected in 1968 described his first engagement with F-105s during a debrief at Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base. The transcript got declassified in 1992. He said his flight leader called the attack against 4 Thuds inbound to Hanoi. Standard intercept. They executed perfectly. The Thuds jettisoned their bombs and turned directly toward the MiGs instead of running. His flight leader called for disengagement. 3 of the 4 MiGs made it out. The 4th pilot tried to complete his attack run and got hit by cannon fire. The defector said he stopped trusting the attack profiles after that mission because the Americans didn't follow the script. Some details just don't survive. I couldn't find VPAF loss records that match specific dates to most F-105 gun kills. The Vietnamese archives are incomplete or unavailable. Soviet advisor reports exist, but they're fragmented. What's clear from American records is that MiG pilots developed a healthy respect for Thuds by mid-1967, even though the performance charts said they shouldn't have to. April 19, 1967. 16 F-105s inbound to the Duan Mai Ordnance Depot southwest of Hanoi. Ken Bell was flying number 3 in the lead flight. Leo Thorsness was running Wild Weasel support with the trail element. The strike package had been airborne for 43 minutes when North Vietnamese ground control began vectoring interceptors toward them. 24 MiGs. the largest concentration of fighters the VPAF had assembled for a single engagement up to that point. 12 MiG-17s and 12 MiG-21s flying coordinated attack profiles. The MiG-21s would engage from high altitude using hit-and-run tactics. The MiG-17s would sweep up stragglers at medium altitude. The plan was solid. Outnumber the Americans 3-2 and force them to jettison ordnance before reaching the target. Red Crown, the Navy radar picket ship in the Gulf of Tonkin, called the threat at 11:04 hours. Strike Lead ordered the package to maintain course. 16 Thuds carrying 96,000 pounds of bombs didn't turn around because MiGs showed up. The mission was hitting Juan Mai. Everything else was secondary. The MiG-21s came first. Thorsness saw them at 12 o'clock high, 7 miles out. He called the break. The formation scattered into 4 ship elements with enough spacing to maneuver. Bell's element stayed with the bombs. Thorsness's element went after the MiG-21s. What happened next lasted 9 minutes, and the mission reports from 3 different flights don't agree on the sequence. Bell's account says he killed 2 MiG-17s in the first 3 minutes. Thorsness's IWO. Harry Johnson logged 1 MiG-21 destroyed at 11:06 hours and another at 11:09 hours. Other pilots in the package claimed kills that couldn't be confirmed. The gun camera footage shows pieces of the engagement, but not the whole picture. The only clear fact is that 16 F-105s fought 24 MiGs over Juan Mai for 9 minutes, and the strike package got through. 12 of the 16 Thuds dropped their bombs on target. 2 took battle damage from MiG cannon fire, but made it to tanker support over Laos. 0 losses. The North Vietnamese lost 6 MiGs confirmed by American gun camera footage and radar tracking. Possibly 8. The VPAF records don't acknowledge specific losses from April 19th, but Soviet advisor cables from late April reference unsustainable attrition during large-scale interception attempts. Someone was doing math about how many MiGs they could afford to lose before the interceptor force stopped being effective. Bell landed at Korat with 400 pounds of fuel and cannon barrels, hot enough that the ground crew had to wait 15 minutes before servicing the aircraft. His flight suit was soaked through from stress and G-loading. He told the debriefers he'd fired 800 rounds total across both engagements. Got 2 kills, maybe 3, but the third MiG disappeared into clouds trailing smoke, and nobody saw it crash. Thorsness landed at Tockley 20 minutes later. His aircraft had taken one 23mm hit in the left wing that punched through without hitting anything critical. Johnson said they'd defeated 4 SAM launches during the engagement while simultaneously running intercepts on the MiG-21s. The mission tape recording captured Thorsness talking himself through the geometry on one intercept. "He's fast, but I'm heavier, so if I time the merge right..." The recording cuts off before he finishes the thought. The after-action analysis from 7th Air Force concluded that the engagement proved F-105 formations could survive concentrated MiG attacks through aggressive tactics and superior gunnery. 27 confirmed kills between June 1965 and September 1968. That's the number the Air Force officially recognizes for F-105 pilots in air-to-air combat. Some sources claim 29. Others say 25, depending on how you count shared kills or probable kills that lacked gun camera confirmation. The breakdown matters more than the total. 18 kills against MiG-17s, 9 against MiG-21s, 0 losses in pure air-to-air engagements, where the F-105 pilot saw the MiG first and engaged offensively. The Thuds that got shot down by MiGs were ambushed while egressing from targets or caught while dodging SAMs with no energy left for maneuvering. Republic Aviation's internal analysis from 1968 tried to explain the results. Their engineers ran performance simulations based on actual engagement data from gun camera footage and mission reports. The simulations confirmed what everyone already knew. The F-105 should lose turning fights against MiG-17s at weights above 45,000 pounds. Should lose energy fights against MiG-21s below 20,000 feet. Should avoid dogfights entirely. But the simulations also found something else. In engagements where the F-105 pilot committed to the fight immediately, turned into the threat within 3 seconds of visual contact, the performance disadvantages mattered less than pilot aggression and weapons effectiveness. The M61 Vulcan gave Thud drivers a 4-second window where they could kill MiGs before the geometry collapsed. 4 seconds doesn't sound like much. It was enough. The kill confirmations came through multiple channels. Gun camera footage was primary evidence. Radar tracking from Red Crown provided secondary confirmation when MiGs disappeared from scopes. Pilot testimony from wingmen who witnessed the kills. Some confirmations came from North Vietnamese radio intercepts, where ground controllers acknowledged losing contact with fighters. 7 pilots accounted for 19 of the 27 kills. Ken Bell got 3. Leo Thorsness got 2 before he was shot down by ground fire in April 1967 and spent 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton. The other 5 pilots whose names I found in declassified records each got between 2 and 4 kills. That concentration suggests the results weren't random luck. Specific pilots figured out how to make the lead sled work in air combat and kept using those techniques successfully. The Air Force never wrote an official tactical manual for F-105 air-to-air combat because acknowledging that the techniques worked meant acknowledging that doctrine was wrong. The Thud was a strike aircraft. Strike aircraft don't dogfight, except when they do and win 27 times. What irritates me is that the institutional knowledge vanished. The pilots who knew how to fight MiGs in a Thud either got shot down, finished their tours, and moved to other aircraft, or retired before anyone systematically documented their methods. The after-action reports describe what happened, but not how. Nobody interviewed Bell or the other successful pilots and asked them to explain their decision-making process during the critical 3 seconds when they chose to turn into threats instead of running. By 1970, the F-105 was being phased out of the strike role. The F-4 Phantom took over. The Phantom had better thrust to weight, better turn performance, better everything except roll rate. The Air Force was happy to retire the lead sled and pretend the whole Vietnam experience had been an unfortunate diversion from the Thud's real mission of delivering nuclear weapons to Soviet targets. The 27 MiG kills became a footnote. Interesting trivia. Not doctrinal lessons, just proof that sometimes physics matters less than the pilot flying the airplane. I found Jack Broughton in 2004. He'd flown 102 missions in F-105s over North Vietnam between 1966 and 1967. Got one confirmed MiG kill in June 1967 and another probable that was never officially recognized. After Vietnam, he wrote 2 books about Thud operations. Both are out of print now, but I tracked down copies through used bookstores. I sent him questions about the air-to-air engagements. He responded with a 4-page letter, handwritten. I'm going to quote parts of it here, because his description of what flying the lead sled felt like is better than anything I could paraphrase. The Thud was never going to win a beauty contest or a turning contest. You sat in that cockpit knowing you were heavier than the other guy and slower in the turns, and if you screwed up the geometry even slightly, you were going to die. That knowledge concentrated the mind wonderfully. The advantage we had, the only real advantage, was that we flew the Thud every day. We knew exactly how much we could pull before the wings came off. We knew the roll rate by heart. We knew how the aircraft felt at 5 Gs versus 6 Gs versus 6.5 Gs when you were pushing it past safe limits because the alternative was getting shot. When MiGs showed up, you had maybe 2 seconds to decide, run or fight. Running was usually smarter. But if the geometry was wrong for running, if they were already inside your turn radius, or you didn't have the airspeed to extend away, then fighting was the only option that didn't end with you ejecting over North Vietnam. The gun made it possible. That Vulcan cannon was the most reliable weapon system on the aircraft. Never jammed on me. Never failed. You got the pipper on target and held the trigger, and 4,000 rounds per minute erased whatever advantage the MiG thought it had. I shot down a MiG-17 on June 3, 1967. The whole engagement lasted maybe 20 seconds from visual contact to impact. He tried a horizontal scissors. I rolled out ahead of him. He thought I'd overshoot. I didn't. The Thud's roll rate let me reverse before he could adjust. I fired from 3,000 feet. He came apart. Afterward, people asked me how I'd won that fight in an airplane that was supposed to lose. I told them I won because I'd made the decision to win 3 seconds after I saw him, and I flew the aircraft like it could win instead of like it was supposed to lose. The performance charts don't account for that. The charts assume both pilots are flying conservatively, within design limits. Nobody over North Vietnam flew conservatively. You either committed fully or you died. Broughton died in 2014, 90 years old, heart failure. He'd been retired from the Air Force for 42 years by then, and most people who knew him had no idea he'd killed MiGs in the Lead Sled. It wasn't something he talked about unless you asked